Welcome to episode 16. We're changing our format a little bit to focus on election issues. Today we're jumping into LGBTQ+ ideology in schools. So let's get started. So today we will begin diving into some big election issues. We want to address what is currently happening and address the different takes of Harris and Trump. Our question today is what is going on with schools and LGBTQ+ ideology.
Her dad, Clifford, partner, Henry.
Student asked why there was no flag recently. She said you can pledge your allegiance to. And oh, that one?
So what type of students are we hoping we have graduate?
First, I will say it is probably worse than you think it is. I will just read some posts and headlines from various articles, and then we'll dive into some of the ideological problems. This is from Scarlett Johnson on X. She writes, 6-year-olds in Cottage Grove, Wisconsin were shown a YouTube video discussing gender identity pronouns, titled, "What Are Your Words?"
Uncle Leor knows how important my words are to me because I am always growing and changing, and some of my words change with me. So every time they visit, they ask, "What are your words, Ari?" Sometimes I know my words right away. Happy, creative, fun, he, him. Sometimes I have to think about my words. Thoughtful, athletic, silly, she, her. Sometimes I have to try my words out. Sleepy, calm, honest, AM.
After the video, the teacher had the class sit in a circle, asking each child to share their preferred pronouns. People like Elon Musk sharing, "Earlier this year, a friend of mine almost had his young daughter taken from him in California just because he wanted her to wait a few years to permanently transition. He talked the police out of taking her when they came to his house. That day, he left California with his family." Here's a news report from Fox 8. The headline states, Hilliard student coerced to identify as opposite sex, anti-LGBTQ+ lawsuit says. This is from SandersCivilRights.com. The Montgomery County Board of Education, the board, added books to the language arts curriculum for elementary school students K through 8th grade that address issues such as sexual orientation, drag shows, and transgenderism. Under the new language arts curriculum, teachers would, in some lessons, read these books to children, and children would read these books themselves. It goes on to say the board abruptly changed its policy and prohibited any further opting out. So at first, parents were allowed to opt out of LGBTQ+ lessons for their students, but the board changed their mind and did not allow parents to opt their students out. I hope you see that this issue is real and it is deep. Some people want to believe it's only here or there, only a few schools deal with it. Some people want to believe it's just 1 or 2 teachers in a school. No, this issue is impacting the law, impacting who gets custody of a child, impacting medical outcomes for children. This issue is huge and it is not going away anytime soon. And we'll dive into this through the lens of this book. So I read this book called The Queering of the American Child. And wow, this was a heavy book. I had no idea how pervasive this ideology was, or really the roots behind this ideology. Let me give you 3 of my personal takeaways from this book. So first is that this is a radically different belief system. And of course, obviously I knew advocating for these rights was different than what I believed. But there's things that are core tenets of this belief that I didn't realize. So people get this idea that people that support gender theory just want to help a few struggling kids get their identity. Even if they disagree with it, they have this imaginary picture of these well-meaning people just trying to help kids do better in their life. That is not an accurate picture of queer theory, of gender ideology, LGBTQ+ advocacy, all these names that really mean the same thing. It's just not true. At the core of gender theory are tenets most people would understand to be evil. I will give 2 examples. The first is that they have a belief that there is no such thing as a normal child. So this goes against this idea that gender ideology proponents are just helping a few struggling kids. In their belief system, all kids are struggling and all of them need help to find their identity. All of them are oppressed in a system that locks them into the rigidity of male and female, and they must effortfully defy norms. Additionally, the second belief I want to talk about is that there is no such thing as innocence. We have to understand that there are adults who do not have moral qualms about committing sexual acts with small children. This is evil. Just because they do not find it evil or understand evil does not mean that it is not evil. It shouldn't matter if it is a small percentage of people who do this or understand this. We should not risk subjecting children to talk sexual content with adults who do not believe in protecting the innocence of children. How this plays out in schools is with teachers assigning students to discuss sexual fantasies or talking to young children about masturbating. This also plays out with teaching students about the good things of doing drag or prostitution, what they might call sex work or sexual expression. This also plays out with just a confusion factor for young children, introducing at a young age that they could be in the wrong body, that they could choose their identity, celebrating and being really excited and happy when students say that they are a gender other than the one that they're born as, or when they kind of participate in this changing of pronouns. So they're really training and teaching children at a young age to identify themselves as something other than that which they are born, because again, they do not believe in normalcy and they do not believe in innocence. The fact that the person advocating this thinks what they are doing is good makes no difference. I remember seeing a clip years and years ago of a former federal agent describing her work interviewing criminals who were on most wanted lists. She said they always believe that they are the good guy. The radical terrorists bombing innocent people believe they are the good guy. So why should we care if these gender ideology advocates believe they are good? It makes no difference as to whether or not what they do is evil. Taking away the innocence of children is evil. Another interesting take from this book is the link to religion, and this is a core theme of the book. The subtitle of this book right in here says how a new school religious cult poisons the minds and bodies of normal kids. So he really frames this whole queering of the American child, use of queer theory in schools as a cult mindset and the development of a cult. So there's just one specific aspect of this kind of religious way of thinking about it that I wanted to talk about. So it states on page 61, queer theory argues that the soul is the prison of the body. And I'm going to read a fuller quote and kind of expand on that a little bit just to give you a bit more context here. Queer theory argues that the soul is the prison of the body. That is, the nature we're born into reflects a bunch of images of what man or woman should be, what our sexuality should be, and how we should behave and dress. These reflections condition our subjective thoughts, our creativity. Our creativity then makes that conditioning a material reality on our bodies. We are thrown into a world where sex, gender, and sexuality are entirely fake products of a political power that tells us we must conform. These constructs condition our soul, our gender identity, or our gender soul, which in turn imprisons our bodies in a particular material form. So it's a very full quote, lots to unpack. I'll just talk about a few things. So we've already talked about the basics before, right? This ideology teaches that there should be no normal. It teaches that the categories of gender, male and female, are limiting to humankind. This directly opposes Christian thinking. According to Christianity, God created them male and female. From the very beginning of all humankind, there have been two genders designed by God to live in harmony with one another. The New Testament in Matthew 19:4 states, "Haven't you read?" He replied that at the beginning the Creator made them male and female. What I find so interesting, though, is in this quote, queer theory argues that the soul is the prison of the body. This is the exact opposite of the core of Christianity. We teach that Christ came to redeem us from our sins, or in other words, from our carnal nature. Romans 8:12 and 13 states, "Therefore, brothers and sisters, we have an obligation, but it is not to the flesh to live according to it. For if you live according to the flesh, you will die. But if by the Spirit you put to death the misdeeds of the body, you will live." It is by having our soul redeemed and denying our flesh that we have true life. But queer theory wants you instead to deny your soul and live for your flesh. This is the most telling indicator that queer theory is entirely demonic. We have to recognize that we are fighting a spiritual battle. More than queer theory wants to create liberals or Democrats, it wants to send people to hell. So more than we should want to create conservatives or Republicans, we should want to proclaim the good news about heaven and the truth about how to live our lives. Sometimes spiritual battles manifest themselves on earth in the form of politics. We cannot give up the fight of ideas. Our words are powerful. We can literally change people's lives for eternity. And my third takeaway from the book, The Queering of the American Child, is that this issue is deep. It isn't going away anytime soon. Honestly, the part of the book that bothered me the most was the academic impact, and it's because I attended Christian universities. I have my doctorate in education, and I didn't learn anything about what was behind these ideologies, what was behind critical theory, what was behind gender theory, what was behind critical race theory. I heard these terms, but I did not learn who was behind it, the history of it, why it exists, or anything about how to combat it or what our stance is on these issues as Christians. But we should be fighting this battle of ideologies. We should be developing good ways of thinking. We should be applying our truth, what we know from the Bible, from Christian teachings about how to live life. We should be advocating for the truth, not just letting culture slip away from us without trying to say anything. This issue is really deep. It's in the Department of Education. We said that earlier in the news reports that the Department of Education is very much advocating LGBTQ plus ideas and celebrating it. This is in our universities. The professors who are training teachers, who are in the process of being certified to teach, are very much proponents of this idea just in general. It's all over universities. So this isn't something that we can just think is going to go away, that someone's going to be popular enough or just say the right thing and suddenly people will change their minds. This is going to take consistency. This is going to take persistence. We're going to need to continue to advocate for the truth and continue to speak the right things and advocate for our ideals and our beliefs. So that was a lot about what's going on. I hope you understand how deep this issue is, and I hope you see that it's really impacting people, not just adults, but people in schools, elementary children, middle school children, high school students. So now we're going to take a look at the candidates and see how they respond to some of the different ways this plays out. So let's first talk about Harris. So this is from a website called glad.org. It's not a non-biased site, but it did provide a list of positions that Harris has taken and likewise that Trump has taken, and we'll get to those. So first for Harris, so she speaks out against book bans in schools and libraries. She calls out groups like Moms for Liberty who threaten the right to read freely. So just to again provide some context here, I did say this was a biased site. Moms for Liberty is a great organization that advocates for parent rights, that tries to teach parents about what's happening in schools. They are not trying to strip students' right to read away. They are trying to remove pornographic materials from schools. I welcome you to look up for yourself the sorts of books that they are trying to remove. There's plenty of videos of people going to school board meetings, reading from these books. There's posts that show you content from the books. Many of these books have clearly pornographic materials, clearly inappropriate things that are not right for students to be reading, much less getting access to in a school library. Okay, but Harris's take on this is to be against Moms for Liberty, is to be against the removal of these materials. So she would rather students have access to these materials in schools. Another one of Harris's takes is that she wants what they call accurate accounts of United States history, including LGBTQ topics as well as race and racism. So what they're saying is they don't want to just teach U.S. history, they want to ensure that there is LGBTQ history, that there is representation. So it's not really so much about having an accurate picture of United States history as it is about making sure LGBTQ plus ideas are incorporated into all subjects, including history. Introducing Title IX updates, so she's very much advocating for what they call the right to use bathrooms that align with students' gender identities. So if a male student decides they're identifying as a girl, that student can choose to use the girls' restroom and likewise the other way. So taking away the ability of schools to stop a male student from being in a female restroom if they felt that was appropriate, right? If the student says that they're transgender, they now have the right to do that. That would be what Harris would advocate for. She states that transgender people are part of the fabric of our nation. If you recall, the Biden-Harris administration had Transgender Day of Visibility on Easter.
To everyone celebrating Transgender Day of Visibility, I want you to know that your president sees you. Jill, Kamala, Doug, our entire administration sees you for who you are, made in the image of God and deserving of dignity, respect, and support.
So they're very much celebratory, excited for, advocating for transgenderism, making it something that we should all be delighted about. There was also a Department of Education sponsored Pride event. So we see on the Harris side very much celebratory, prideful, excited, wanting LGBTQ plus ideas to be spread, not wanting anyone to stop it, not wanting to remove pornographic materials, not wanting to stop men from being in women's spaces because of their identity. Trump, on the other hand, wants an end of Obama-era protections, allowing transgender students in public schools to choose bathrooms that align with their gender identity. This is something I remember from his administration, that he was very much on the school side of being able to make appropriate restrictions, of schools not being forced to accept, that because a student identifies a certain way, they have to be allowed to use a locker room or a restroom. That could lead to potentially harmful situations for students. So Trump was in favor of schools being able to create policies against boys being in girls' spaces and vice versa. They argue in this article that Trump's Supreme Court nominees could make it difficult to support LGBTQ plus protections, supporting their students. So again, they're talking about this kind of issue where we have, for example, students want to have LGBTQ plus club, but they go to a Christian private school, and the school doesn't want a club advocating an ideology that's against Christianity. So Trump would be on the side of the school being able to function according to their religion, not forcing them to adhere to LGBTQ plus ideas. Trump promised to dismantle the Department of Education. And as we stated earlier, the Department of Education is very much celebratory of LGBTQ plus ideas. So in dismantling it, he's basically saying that that's not important, that we don't need to be advocating for these ideologies in our education. Trump announced that on day one, he would reverse protections for transgender students granted as part of Biden's Title IX updates. So remember, when they say protections, they're referring to things like a boy being able to be in a girl's restroom, a boy being able to be in a girl's locker room. That's what they're trying to protect, and Trump is against that being protected. He wants schools to be able to enforce appropriate rules. Trump threatened to end federal funding for schools that provide supportive learning environments for transgender kids. Now remember, again, I'm filtering this through because the article I got this from is biased. When they say supportive learning environments, what they're saying is they want a learning environment that advocates LGBTQ plus ideas. So Trump is saying we don't need to be advocating LGBTQ plus ideas. We don't need to be advocating critical race theory, He wants schools to actually focus on education of students. Trump claimed that if reelected, he would prevent transgender women nationwide from participating in women's sports. And remember there, when they say transgender women, they mean men. So he would prevent men from participating in women's sports. And so we see a huge divide. There's just a huge difference between Harris and Trump. What we have on the side of Harris, very much advocating for LGBTQ plus ideas, celebrating it, thinking it's wonderful, wanting everybody to learn about it, nothing about anything wrong with it. We just want more and more of it. Whereas Trump, on the other hand, is saying we want schools to be allowed to make restrictions. We want schools to be allowed to make appropriate measures that protect girls-only spaces. We don't want to be advocating sexual ideas at the expense of the actual education of students. So on this issue, I'm very much on the side of Trump. We've talked before just about Christianity and where biblical ideas stand on this issue. And the Bible is very clear that there is male and there is female, and that's very clear. And so we want somebody who's president who understands that Christians believe in these ideas, believe in male and female, and not to be forced to participate in this LGBTQ plus ideology. We don't want this ideology to spread, right? Even if Christianity is protected, we don't want this to spread in our culture. It's damaging, it's destructive to people. People's lives have been really harmed and hurt by LGBTQ plus ideology, so it should have absolutely no place in our society, and we should continue to speak against it. And the Trump administration is the administration that will allow us to do so. Thanks for tuning in to episode 16. Watch out for our next episode because we'll be diving into more election issues. And as always, I look forward to hearing what you have to say, so feel free to leave your comments below or let us know what election issue you want us to dive into next. And remember to live in truth.